The screaming wouldn't stop. It echoed through the concrete halls of ADX Florence like a ghost that refused to die. Inside one of the cells, a man pounded his fists against the steel door until his knuckles split open, blood smearing the tiny window slot. He shouted words no one could fully understand, half rage, half madness. The guards didn't move. They had seen this before. At America's toughest prison, scenes like this were not rare. They were the rule. Inmates here whispered that the walls talked, that the silence crushed their minds more than chains ever could. Some swore they saw shadows crawling across their cells at night. Others scratched messages into the concrete until their fingernails broke. But the most terrifying truth was this. Once you entered ADX Florence, you disappeared. Buried alive in a box no bigger than a bathroom, locked down for 23 hours a day, even the strongest men began to crumble. And on this night, one prisoner was about to reach his breaking point in a way that would shake the entire prison. But how did it come to this? To understand why ADX Florence terrifies inmates more than any other prison in America, you have to go back to where it all began. The prison was built in 1994, hidden in the mountains of Colorado. Locals called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But this wasn't just a nickname. It was a warning. ADX was designed for the worst of the worst. Terrorists, drug lords, gang leaders, and men who had killed even behind bars. The government wanted a place where escape was impossible. Rebellion was crushed before it began, and silence was the only companion. The cells were built like tombs. Concrete walls, a concrete bed, a concrete desk, and a slit of a window too narrow to climb through. Inmates could see the sky but not the ground. It was like being buried alive while still breathing. At first, many prisoners thought they would handle it. They bragged about surviving tougher places, Rikers, San Quentin, Leavenworth. But ADX was different. It wasn't just the rules, it was the design. Every step, every sound, every flicker of light was controlled. The doors were built so thick that you could scream all night, and the man in the next cell might never hear you. But over time, something strange began to happen. The silence became too heavy, the routine too crushing. Men started to talk to themselves. They ripped up their sheets and tied knots in them, whispering about ending it all. Some scratched the walls until their fingers bled, just to feel something. One inmate, a former gang leader from Chicago, tried to carve his name into the concrete with a piece of metal he'd hidden in his sock. When the guards caught him, they dragged him out in shackles. He came back days later, quiet, eyes hollow, as if the fight had been drained from his soul. Others weren't so quiet. Some flooded their cells by clogging the toilets, hoping to get attention. Others smeared food or worse across the walls, anything to break the monotony. But the guards always responded the same way, with calm, with control, with no hint of weakness. Still, there were moments when even the guards felt the weight of ADX. The silence wasn't natural, the isolation wasn't normal. It was a place where time seemed to bend, where weeks felt like months, and months like years. And then came the night that changed everything. It started like any other, the shift quiet, the halls dim, the prisoners locked away. But in one cell, a man who had been silent for months suddenly began to scream. At first, it sounded like pain. Then it grew louder, more desperate, more unhinged. Guards rushed to the door, peering through the slot. The inmate was tearing at his mattress, his body shaking, his eyes wild. "Get him under control!" One officer barked his kedder. But before they could act, the prisoner did something that froze them all. He smashed his head against the concrete wall again and again, blood spilling down his face as he shouted words that made no sense. His body convulsed, his fists slammed against the steel door, and the entire tier erupted in noise. Other inmates, stirred by the madness, began shouting too, pounding their doors, howling, chanting. The silence of ADX was broken in an instant, replaced by chaos. And in that moment, every guard on duty realized the truth. Even the toughest prison in America could not contain the human mind forever. What happened next would make ADX Florence's name echo even louder as the most terrifying prison in the United States. The chaos spread like wildfire. One cell after another erupted with noise. Inmates who hadn't spoken in weeks began banging on their steel doors, kicking, screaming, shouting words that mixed together into a deafening roar. The concrete walls of ADX Florence trembled under the force of hundreds of fists. For the first time in years, the silence that defined the prison had been shattered. The guards rushed in, shields up, batons ready, their boots striking the floor in sharp unison. Orders were barked through radios, but the voices were drowned out by the storm of noise inside the tier. For the men locked away, it was the closest thing to freedom they had felt in years, if only in their voices, in their defiance. The prisoner who had started it all lay on the floor of his cell, blood dripping from his forehead. His eyes darted wildly, and he continued to shout words no one could understand, as if he were arguing with shadows only he could see. His hands were raw from pounding the walls, his breath heavy and broken. The guards ordered him to step back, but he didn't move. He lunged toward the door instead, slamming his body against it so hard that his sound echoed down the hallway. Sparks of fear flickered in the officer's eyes, but they didn't show it. At ADX Florence, hesitation could be deadly. "Open the cell!" one shouted. With a loud click, the heavy door swung open. The tactical team stormed in, shields slamming against the prisoner, pinning him down. He thrashed violently, spitting, screaming, his strength shocking even the men trained to control the most dangerous criminals in America. It took 5 officers to cuff him, shackle his legs, and drag him out of the cell. His screams echoed long after he was gone. But the other inmates didn't stop. Some shouted insults at the guards, others laughed like madmen, their voices sharp and cruel. One voice rose above the rest, deep and commanding, chanting a phrase over and over until the entire tier joined in. The sound rolled through the prison like thunder, shaking the guards to their core. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise started to fade. One by one, the voices weakened, replaced by heavy breathing and silence. The chaos had burned itself out, leaving only the heavy echo of what had just happened. For the guards, it was another night of control re-established. But for the inmates, it was proof of something far more terrifying, that even buried in silence and isolation, their minds were slipping, one by one. Days later, word spread through the cells. The man who had started it all had been moved deeper into the prison, to a place even darker, even quieter. Some said he had gone completely insane. Others whispered that he had been taken to the hole inside the hole, a punishment cell where there was nothing at all, not even a slit of a window to the outside world. And that was when the fear set in. It wasn't the beatings, the shackles, or even the locked doors that terrified inmates the most. It was the thought of disappearing inside ADX Florence, not just from the world, but from themselves. They watched each other closely, waiting to see who would break next. Because in this prison, it wasn't about strength or toughness or gang power. It was about survival against the one enemy none of them could escape. Silence. One inmate scribbled a message onto a scrap of paper and slid it under his door during meal rounds. It read, "This place isn't a prison, it's a coffin, and we're the ones buried inside." The guards ignored it. They had a job to do, and feelings had no place inside the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But among the inmates, the message spread like a warning. Every day, every hour, they wondered if today would be the day their own mind betrayed them. And so, the legend of ADX Florence grew, not just as America's toughest prison, but as the one place even the hardest criminals feared. not because of chains or walls, but because of what those walls did to a man's soul. For in ADX Florence, the punishment wasn't death. It was being forced to live, locked away, alone, until even the strongest mind began to unravel. And that is why ADX Florence terrifies inmates more than any other prison in America.